thank you very much for setting aside the time for this one.
Thank you for having me.
Although I suppose Lolo might have a word or two if you did say no. But okay, can I ask you to identify yourself and which Ramos daughter you
Sure.
are? Okay.
My name is Sam Ramos-Jones. I'm the son of Angel Ramos.
All right, all right. How old are you, Sam?
I'm 26.
You're 26. Okay, so let me get back to that very first question that I asked you about. You were born. Were you born during his presidency or shortly after?
Right at the outset. So I was born August 92.
Oh yeah, real start. And yeah, share with me that story you said
Okay,
about your
so-
name.
So the story goes that while my mom was pregnant with me, part of her, campaign volunteer duties was passing out sample ballots. Hence why I'm named Sam, supposedly.
And the choice was female, male.
Yeah, if it was gonna be a girl, Samantha, boy, Samuel.
Okay.
So here I am.
Okay. Pet name, nickname. From Lolo.
Well, he calls all of us Guy, or at least he used to for a while. Say hey, Guy. Usually Sam. Sometimes, when we're growing up, the security guys like to call me Sarge because my initials are SRJ. So they got a bit of a kick out of that as well.
Okay, okay. But you were very young, and when he left the presidency, what? So you were just about 6.
Yeah, correct.
Correct. Was there any realization at that time that this guy is some big honcho and all? I mean, was it?
I mean, there was some. I think, naturally, the real appreciation came much later. It's funny because my recollections of that time are, I remember excellent soup in Malacanang. I don't know why, but I remember that extremely vividly. I remember walking through, and seeing kind of the opulence and the I don't know.
Rooms in the
Yeah,
halls,
through like military meetings and stuff like that, which of course at that age none of it really registered. I remember I think getting into a helicopter, one of these Huey, no doors on the side, so that was a little scary. And it kind of only registered a few years later that like that's not a normal mode of transport that most people have experienced.
And it's not exactly referred to as a safe mode of transport, if I remember my own experiences with those UWIs. But when did the actual realization come in then?
I think to a certain degree it's still coming in.
It's still there?
Yeah, I mean, beyond the presidency, my grandfather is somebody that has lived through not just important parts of our national history, but world history in general. And, later in his life was in a position to affect history. So I think, and this is as recently as, 2 years ago when he was still asked to do high-level diplomacy with China. So, to that extent, I think I'm still processing all that he's accomplished and contributed.
What's he like as a Lolo, grandfather?
Oh, he's very funny.
Really?
And I think this is something that a lot of his colleagues will also attest to. He's a constant joker. Although, I think, he can be quite corny sometimes. So you have to have that same sense of humor to appreciate it. He's always been very supportive of us, all of us grandkids, whatever our interests have been, whatever our educational kind of pursuits. He's always been there. And he's also been, willing to share kind of advice and his sort of guidance for what he thinks we should be up to.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What's he like with family? I mean, the jokes, I suppose, or his jovial side is much reserved for close family, his intimate circle of friends. It's not exactly very public side of him, and he shares that, you know.
No, yeah, I think in public, he's a little more professional.
Stiff.
Yeah, a little more stern. The military background certainly invokes that. But yeah, I mean, with us, actually, he's not so serious. I mean, there are a few times around the lunch table. So our family has Sunday lunch together every week. And the me and the rest of the grandkids every now and then will kind of prod him on his opinion for something that's going on in current affairs and politics. And then he becomes very analytical and straightforward and just says, this is exactly what's going on.
Also, he can shift that fast from jovial, kidding, corny joke FVR to very serious for a statesman.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I've been told, since he was in the military, he was known for like reading every newspaper in the morning. I think that kind of pattern of behavior has persisted, and he constantly writes about what's going on.
Yeah.
So he is very willing to share, his opinion of what's going on.
Any moods?
How do you mean?
Temperament?
I think most people will attest to the fact that he does have a temper, although thankfully I haven't really seen much of it. A few times, not directed at me. I don't recall. But I think having that side to you is also good. When you need to be effective, when you need to be decisive. But generally, very even-tempered, very friendly.
Okay. Any favorites among the Apos?
I think, we're all quite different.
Or is it cyclical?
Yeah, I think, my grandparents, I think they've been pretty good about not playing favorites. And we're all quite different. So we make a joke that, because the oldest of the boys, CJ, he looks exactly like FVR at his age. And CJ is also a great golfer. So they have that in common. I think, like my grandfather, I have some interest in, political history and world affairs, that type of thing. We have, some of my other cousins are interested in music, which, my Lola likes to sing, although he's not very good at it. But, they certainly inherited that from my grandmother. So, we're all quite different. And as I've said, they've been very supportive of each of those, different interests and pursuits.
So he actually he relates to you guys based on the having identified those interests and all. No?
I would say so.
That's how he makes the connections.
And I mean, something you mentioned the word cycle earlier. I mean, something that I think quite deliberately he did is, even after his term, actually, especially after his term, he would go on foreign trips, economic forums, political meetings, those types of things. And kind of like on a rotation, each one of us, at least once, has been his aide, chief of staff for that trip. So I know, for example, my other cousin Patrick, this was at a time that he was really getting into photography. So he's taken some really fantastic photos with FVR on some of those trips. I, for one, did some work with him in 2016, doing a lot of kind of research and typing out memos. I think and I think we're all very thankful for this. He's given each of us a chance, not only to hang out with him as a family, but at least get a glimpse of kind of the working side of him.
That he does.
Yeah.
You have how do you call him? I mean,
I call him Lolo. I call him Boss.
Gramps.
No, never Gramps.
Lolo, Boss.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned it a bit earlier. He did play a role in your upbringing. Was he influential, for example, in choice of, friends, career?
Not directly. I don't think so. Although, when you have a figure like that in your life, that I think it's inescapable that they'll have some influence. But I would think that my academic and career pursuits have followed out of his own career path. His kind of something he's often repeated is the importance of the youth getting involved in this task of nation building, right?
Okay.
So I studied political science, and I'm certain that's because I grew up in a political family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly just your grandfather, no? Senator Shahani.
Yeah, I mean,
Grand aunt, and then your parents. I mean their parents. No?
yeah. So absolutely right. Like Lala Leti, in her own right, is a crusader for women's rights. First female president pro tempore of the Senate. Also served with distinction in the UN. And yeah, actually the story that I find most interesting about their parents, Narciso and Angela, is during the war, like before the war they were quite well off. He was in the legislature. And during the war, I mean, he turned underground and was evidently running information with the resistance. Evidently, my grandfather, at the age of 14, was also acting as a courier in that capacity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just find incredible how they lived through those times, and at the end of it, all that's filtered down to us has been this generosity of spirit, because they've been through times where things were very limited, things were very scarce.
Very, very trying.
Yeah.
Very challenging times.
Yeah.
How do you live with that legacy? I mean, that's a pretty heavy burden. Expectations from everyone else.
With regards to expectation, nobody has kind of pushed the idea that you've got to compete or match up. But certainly, there is a certain degree of weight that you carry. I mean, not just, in particular for those individuals that are close to us, but I think because of their experience, what's filtered down to us grandkids is the fact that that story is not just about a few individuals. That story is about, a national path of, my grandfather is a generation and a half from independence from Spain, his father was born right around that time, 1900. And he lived through the occupation of the World War II, and ultimately was in a position to say that, there are certain values that we need to aspire towards and make a stand for. And I think, the important part for us is that, of course, he'll take his due credit of being a big part of those stories, but also has instilled in us that it's not about the famous people. It's not about the headlines. The fact, EDSA, for example, was only possible because millions of people whose names were never published in any newspaper turned out to make a contribution.
Right. Very, very great insight there. What's he like as a parent to your mom?
Okay, I don't think you can put in this part, but the joke about my mom is that, FVR has 5 daughters, but my mom is the only son. So she's the oldest.
Yes.
And so, I think early on for her, before my grandfather had really made such a successful career, things were not so easy. She went to school on the back of like an infantry transport vehicle. So quite early on, and with her younger sisters, quite early on, I think she had to like help, raised them a bit. So, and I think he's also been quite forthright about thanking my grandmother for really putting in the work. 5 kids is not easy doing, especially when your husband is off, chasing communists or out in barracks in different parts of the country, right? But I think as a parent, he's because how to say. Give me a moment. He may not always have, been around there physically, but I think he's certainly been a constant presence and a guiding presence. I mean, even today, like my mom and him, and my mom and my grandmother are close collaborators. Speak often, work together often. And yeah, my mom and my grandfather kind of butt heads every now and then because she inherited a bit of the stubbornness.
Yep.
But I guess that's also taught us that,
Just a bit. I think they're pretty much close to that.
Yeah.
Anyway, growing up, were there do's and don'ts? I mean, imposed. Lolo is like this, and he's. Or
No, I mean,
can't do this.
if you're asking if we were scared of him, right? I felt like we had to mind our manners around him. Absolutely not.
Around him, yeah. No.
No,
But
no,
what
no.
about in public? I mean, were there certain rules, do's and don'ts? You can't do this. Be mindful of who your lolo is, and that kind of thing.
Maybe I don't recall any.
Or
if
was
I'm
it
being
really just
totally
self-imposed?
honest, I mean, I think there is some general idea that okay, when we're putting on nice clothes and there's huge crowds of people, just we were all quite young in those days, so just like stick close to your parents, let hold their hand, do whatever,
right.
smile for the camera. CJ and Liana would probably remember better than me, but as far as I can tell, we were allowed to do kind of whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and those big ceremonial halls in the palace, I mean, you let a child run around those. Touché. Okay. I already asked you this. Did he influence school selection, peer or group association, career choice? Not exactly. Huh?
Not directly, I would say.
For example, when you did select a school or did identify a career path he wanted to go through, and he found out, I mean, how was he give advice? This is this, pick out.
Yeah, there's certainly been times where I've kind of opened up to him about, okay, Lola, this is a field that I'm interested in, and I mean, he supported me. He's had very frank conversations with me and directed me to certain people to talk to.
What's the reaction like when you get from your peers, colleagues, associates, people in general when they realize you're a grandchild?
Yeah, there is a.
What's it like?
There's kind of a moment of surprise. I guess particularly because it's not something that I'm just blurting out when I
you
meet
don't
people.
advertise it.
And I've always felt like a little bit like people feel compelled to say something nice, which is good, and I appreciate or I hope that it's genuine. But I think it's something that sometimes when you meet people, they kind of already know that or they've been informed. But I still have friends today, especially the ones that I went to school with in the U.S., for example, that they just don't know. And the times that people do find out, there is some surprise. I think part of the surprise is that we don't really talk about it so much.
Yes.
Of course, with close friends, you have to talk about family. You have to talk about these deeper things. But I think most of our generation, we have great admiration for my grandfather, my grandmother, but we also have some kind of understanding of preference for privacy.
Are you comfortable with that? The fame or the attention that comes with a famous grandfather, a famous great grandfather?
I will say it's I don't think anyone in our family has really embraced fame or celebrity. I don't really think anybody has tried to cultivate it. Certainly not exploit it. So there is honestly a strange, tinge of discomfort of having never really gotten used to certain things. Like, if we're out in public and it used to be much more severe, but just like, mobs of people trying to take photos, get autographs, that type of thing. Actually, okay, this is a pretty good anecdote. I traveled with him to Tokyo in summer of 2011. And, Japan is an hour time difference. So I'm getting close to landing and I'm changing the time on my watch. And I look at his watch and I think it's off. So I go to tell him, like, oh, you've set it wrong.
Right.
And he goes, no. That's correct. His watch was set 20 minutes fast. And he explained to me, that is for me to clock in 20 minutes of buffer for people to bother me and take photos and sign autographs when I'm trying to leave from one place to another. So, yeah.
He's got it.
I mean,
planned as
he's
well,
figured out a system, I think, after all these years. Yeah.
That's actually what I'm going to be asking you about now. You've actually accompanied him, as with some other cousins, on a number of his trips overseas and acted as his assistant. So you've done work for him.
Yes, a little bit.
How long did it? So you mentioned 2016, and how long?
So
were you in for?
that would have been the kind of last, most recent time we did serious work. So I believe in July of that year, President Duterte. Actually, he didn't really ask. He announced that my grandfather would be special envoy to China. Then he asked, and my grandfather, did acquiesce. So I think that was from July till about September of that year. That involved, first a lot of kind of planning here. We had to consolidate from different sources, DFA, from intelligence sources, military sources, kind of the background of what was going on. This was at the same time that the permanent court
ruling came out.
Yes. So the South China Sea issue was a hot button issue. Of course, during the Aquino administration, relations with China had almost evaporated. So my grandfather's involvement was basically the first high-level kind of
Engagement.
bilateral engagement between our two countries in quite some time. So, eventually we met with our counterparts in Hong Kong in August of that year, came back, debriefed the president as well as some of the members of cabinet and other officials. And after a couple meetings, kind of my grandfather decided my job is done. My job was to, as he said, break the ice, restart those bilateral relationships. And of course, President Duterte accepted Xi Jinping's offer to go to Beijing, I believe in October of that year.
Almost to a T, your grandfather's cabinet officers remember how very detailed and how very comprehensive an outlook he would require of them to provide him. All of that summed up in the acronym CSW, which was completed staff work. I mean, working as his assistant, close in assistant. Did he exact the same rigors of you?
I kind of figured it out. Talking to people that have worked with him, I think it helped that I had some kind of background. So I had a internship at a hedge fund in New York. But my job was basically, my boss would say, find out everything you can find on this company or this industry. Or so I'd do a bunch of research, create a fact sheet, summarize, executive summary, that type of thing. So I think that skill set came in handy. But yeah, completed staff work was a very real thing. So for example, if there were certain individuals he wanted me to meet with, get briefed by, or take phone calls with, certain think tanks abroad, right? So what I would do is, first I would take notes during the thing, but I would also record it. From the recording, I would make a transcription. From that, figure out what is the important points, give that as well as recommendations. He seemed to like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I kind of got that idea, as I said, talking to people, but also, reading things that, he's written himself. And that idea that, comprehensive solutions first require close studies of problems. Frankly, I think that's something that a lot of our leaders fail to appreciate.
After him, You enjoyed working for him?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Absolutely. It was... you kind of felt like you were getting a front row seat at an important show. I...
Go ahead.
Heck, I've never been escorted, like getting off a plane into a private terminal as we did to Hong Kong, for example. No, but beyond that, what I really appreciated, because when he asked if I was interested, actually May asked, I said, I totally am. I just don't want to, I want to make sure I'm not making Xerox and coffee, right? So what I really appreciate is the fact that I was given the opportunity to really contribute and do quite rigorous engagement in working with him. And even on earlier things, during that Tokyo trip in 2011. As I said, he likes reading all of the news every day. So I would get up at 6 in the morning in Japan, printing about 30 pages of Xerox, which were the news headlines from the office here.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I specified on the next trip, I don't want to do Xerox anymore.
That's staff work. But apparently you did you did enjoy doing the head work, no?
Yeah.
And he liked that too. Huh?
Yeah, and I think it was good because, a lot of the geopolitical issues that we're facing today are not new. Right back there's a political cartoon from the late 90s of my grandfather standing up to a Chinese warboat. This issue is persisted.
Still alive.
Yeah. So I think a lot of, his ideas about what needed to be done are still relevant. Some of those are being pursued more vigorously than others.
How does that take to you? Given the unique kind of work that you're doing, that a lot of these issues, as you said, they're still alive. They've taken on a life of their own. A lot of them were actually tackled or initiated. Engagements were initiated specifically during your grandfather's period.
I think my grandfather will agree with you. A feature of our politics is a lack of continuity. This is baked into our Constitution, and it's something that, once again, has been in debate for a long time. I'll reserve my opinions for the current debate now. But I think something that he certainly recognized is that you need democratic turnover. But what you don't want is that long-term policy turns over with every new administration. It's impossible to make long-term investments in infrastructure, in the military, those types of things, without outlooks of 10, 20, 15, 10, 15, 20 years. So in a 6-year term, there is some difficulty in ensuring that the initiatives you start will be carried out, to the finish. A lot of times they're continued, but they can be altered, they can be subject to unsavory practices. So I think, that's something that he was also very conscious of. Of course, charter change was something that he thought quite deeply about during his own time.
How, how do you take to that? I mean, you were very young at the time, but looking back 15, 20 years later, you did realize that there was an attempt, no, to change the charter so that at the very least they could extend his term by a couple of more years and maybe just finish what he had intended to achieve. How does that sit with you?
Um,
Could he have done it? I mean, having worked with him, no,
Certainly.
as well.
Frankly, yes. I think there was some discussion at the time of his age, which we now know is a completely nonsense critique because our current president entered office at the
much
age
older.
that my grandfather was when he retired from that office.
Exactly.
And my grandfather, as I said, up until 2 years ago, was doing high-level diplomacy on behalf of this country. So I certainly think that's possible. That would have been possible. At the same time, public opinion, there are some critiques, which I haven't looked into, that there was some degree of manufacturing resistance to this initiative. But I'm sure a lot of it was genuine. And when he felt that, he backed off. And I think that also tells you something about the nature of my grandfather, which is that, for all the different aspects of his character, on a philosophical level, he is a Democrat. And before and after his term as an elected official, there were opportunities for him to, if he was hungry for power, I'm sure, to grab onto it longer than would have been constitutionally allowed to him. So I think that, there is, at a fundamental level, what I really appreciate is somebody that has held tremendous power in their hands and realized that you have to give it back. He tells this story about meeting the first Philippine team to climb Mount Everest. And I don't know the exact way that this story is told, but kind of at the end of it is this line that democracy is a lot like climbing Everest. Because the way up is optional, but coming down is mandatory. At the end of the day, for democracy to work, you got to work your way down. You got to give up power.
That's a terrific description there. He gave that.
That's one of his. You'll have to ask him about that one.
Yeah. Terrific. Difficult getting up in much the same way that democracy is. And then, you get up there, you enjoy the view for a while, and get down. I'm heading towards the last part of my prepared questions here, Sam. What do you tell people about him as grandfather, as a role model figure? Is he, by the way?
Oh, certainly.
For you?
Certainly is.
What do you tell people about?
Oh, whatever they want to know. Sorry, that's a bit of a difficult question to unpack.
What do you share? What do you share with people about him? About working for him? About being an apo?
Well, I guess what I try to convey is that there is some degree of this larger-than-life character that I'm still in awe, At the same time, he is my kind of fuddy-duddy grandfather that puts on pajamas and falls asleep in front of the television in my mom's apartment every New Year's and takes a nap until it's time for the fireworks to go off. And it's kind of funny. I actually, we started in the beginning discussing his sense of humor. Actually, I think that's something that ties this whole thing together, because the only way that I can reconcile this very normal, you know, old man with this extraordinary career and mind is with a great sense of humor. And I think that's something that we've all inherited. When he retired, so like early 2000s, my cousins and I would always dread going out with him, because for a while he had a penchant of wearing, you know, his nice Italian leather dress shoes, but white socks, and shorts that were cut above the knee. So so there was some degree of anxiety being seen. And he's always been, I think, quite fashion forward. So actually, what I just tell people is how incredibly, you know, funny he is, and how kind of our life around him kind of requires a certain degree of humor to really make sense of.
You aren't married yet, no?
No, not yet.
No kids yet. But is it something that you've thought about already? What would you tell your children of Lolo FBR? That should be the last one.
Yeah.
Anyway.
You know, I would tell them that we were fortunate enough. We were fortunate enough to be related to an example of an exemplary life. Somebody that, you know, from a very early age experienced both a certain degree of affluence and opportunity, but also experienced those things being taken away. His ancestral home being burned down, loved ones, you know, being lost in that war. And he exemplified this idea of not, you know, of not expecting anything to be just given to him. There's a strong, and I think this relates to his faith. I mean, something that we didn't yet get a chance to discuss. My grandfather is actually a very, you know, he takes his faith very seriously. And I think, you know, there is a sense of that Protestant work ethic. Actually, the reason he wound up at West Point wasn't because he had a particular interest in joining the military. He had seen an advertisement for a scholarship and figured that in post-war Manila, that was his best shot at getting a great education, going to the United States. And he flunked his initial physical exam because his chest and his shoulders were too small. So I think, like, you know, many Filipinos before and since, he has kind of made his own way. And before she passed, my Lola Letty, Shahani Ramos, you know, told me the story of how he kind of like constructed, as I'm sure a lot of us have seen in garages all over the country, you know, out of rebar and concrete, a set of weights so that he could build up his chest and pass the physical to. That's actually how he ended up at West Point and started his military career. And I think, you know, so those things have been baked in. This idea that achievement isn't really the result of fame, who you're related to. There's some luck involved, certainly, but it's really about the decisions you make and the effort you put in towards a certain objective. So I would say the lesson, you know, if and when I have children, is that you don't have to be president, you don't have to be in the military, you don't have to do any of the same things. Although you probably should like golf. But the lesson is simply that you don't take things for granted. When there are opportunities presented to you, you take them. You don't assume that the world owes you really anything. If you want something, you have to go out and make it for yourself. I think, you know, for us as grandchildren, that has been one of the greatest influences, and I hope that is a lesson that people in this country appreciate about what it means to not only further yourself as an individual, which of course is important, but what is required to further, this nation as a whole. My grandfather, I think, he's obviously created a cult of personality and celebrity about him, but he'll be the first person to say that what matters is citizen participation, not just the participation of senators and congressmen, the rich and famous. We need more of a participation in our democracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.